Monday is the day this country recognizes as Columbus Day, honoring Christopher Columbus, who we were taught in primary school, sailed across the ocean blue in 1492 and allegedly discovered America. Except Columbus didn't discover anything. It wasn't this country that he landed on, and Columbus was a genocidal monster that no one should be celebrating. Now, there's a whole lot of world history that undergirds the exploration that Columbus undertook, full of terms and people that you should look up, folks, like the Dum Diversas of 1452, the Romanus Pontives of 1454, Pope Alexander VI, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, the Inter Cetera of 1494, the Law of Nations, and the Doctrine of Discovery. That's too much to go into today, but we need to be clear about what Columbus really did and what people are really celebrating. In 1492, Columbus landed on what he called San Salvador in the Bahamas. Natives called it Guanahani. He explored Guana, which is Cuba, Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti, and he brought a small amount of gold, some native plants and birds, and the first of the kidnapped natives from the islands back to Spain. He wrote a letter to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella about what he found, saying, quote, "I discovered many islands inhabited by numerous people. I took possession of all of them for our most fortunate king by making public proclamation and unfurling his standard, no one making any resistance." This dude actually just stood on some rock and said, "Hey, I'm here on behalf of the King of Spain," put a flag out there and said that no one made any resistance. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella wanted to keep Portugal from laying claim to the riches of the lands Columbus said he discovered. So they petitioned Pope Alexander VI to issue a decree to establish Spain's rights to possess the land that Columbus, quote unquote, found. Pope Alexander VI then issued the papal bull, the Inter Cetera of 1494, which established that Spain could claim any discovered land that was not already held by a Christian noble authority and could claim land, quote, west from a line drawn 100 leagues toward the west and south from any of the islands commonly known as the Azores and Cape Verde. With the stroke of a pen, folks, the Pope created an imaginary dividing line in the world on a north-south axis in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. All territory east of the line of demarcation was to be Portuguese. All the territory to the west was to be the sole domain of Spain. And under the alleged auspices of expanding Christianity, the papal bullas, which are letters of authority from the Pope of the Catholic Church, gave Christian explorers the right to claim lands they discovered and lay claim to those lands for their alleged Christian monarchs. Any land that was not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited. If the pagan inhabitants could be converted, they might be spared. But if not, they could be enslaved or killed. That's what the Pope said. But let's be honest. Columbus wasn't in this for any actual faith. None of these people were. Columbus's own writings that are found in The Life of Christopher Columbus from his own letters and journals, which was a book curated by Edward Everett Hale, made clear what Columbus was really after: wealth and power. In his own writings, Columbus admitted that the Arawak Indians that he encountered on the island of Haiti were peaceful and generous people, and he thought that they were in fact destitute because they didn't dress like he did. But he noticed the small gold ornaments that some wore in their ears. So he took the first group of Indians captive to force them to lead him to the source of that gold. Columbus himself admits in his own writings now that though he knew that the Arawaks were peaceful and posed him no threat, he actually wanted to enslave them anyway. He said, quote, "They would be good servants and of good disposition, For I see that they repeat very quickly everything which is said to them. Columbus wrote back to the king and queen of Spain about the vast riches in the land, but there actually were no vast riches. The only gold around was bits of dust garnered from the streams, but the indigenous people were enslaved to find and mine this vast amount of gold anyway. And too many of those enslaved died in captivity, being forced to find something that didn't exist. So Columbus, desperate to pay back the dividends to those who had invested in his excursions, had to make good on his promise to fill the ships with gold. On Haiti, where he and his men imagined huge gold fields to exist, they ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given copper tokens to hang around their necks. Indians found without copper tokens had their hands cut off and bled to death. The Arawaks did try to resist, but they faced Spaniards who had armor, muskets, swords, and horses. When the Spaniards took prisoners, they hanged them or burned them to death. Among the Arawaks, mass suicides began with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians on Haiti were dead. Then, when it became clear that there was no gold left, or really none to be found in abundance, the Indians were taken as slave labor on huge estates known later as encomiendas. They were worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. By the year 1515, there were perhaps 50,000 Indians left. By 1550, there were 500. A report of the year 1650 shows that none of the original Arawaks or their descendants were left on the island. Bartolomé de las Casas was a young priest who participated in the original conquest of Cuba, and for a time he owned a plantation on which Indians were enslaved. But he gave that up and became a vehement critic of the Spanish cruelty he initially participated in. Las Casas transcribed Columbus's journal, and in his 50s, he himself wrote a multi-volume work called The History of the Indies, which chronicles the atrocities of Columbus and the Spaniards. He ultimately became a fervent opponent of Spanish brutality against the indigenous people. When Las Casas arrived on Hispaniola in 1508, he wrote, "There were 60,000 people living on this island, including the Indians, so that from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. Who in future generations will believe this? I myself, writing it as a knowledgeable eyewitness, can hardly believe it." But the firsthand witness of the genocide of the Arawak Indians, written by Las Casas, was later forgotten, as it was overshadowed by modern historians, European historians, who were highly regarded, who whitewashed Columbus's crimes against humanity, never mentioning the record of genocide that Bartolomé de las Casas provided. That's what people who claim they celebrate Christopher Columbus are actually celebrating. They're celebrating not only his genocidal campaign, but also the European whitewashing, literally whitewashing, of the slaughter of entire indigenous civilizations and cultures. That's why on Monday, I'll be honoring the indigenous people and their ongoing struggle against the blood-soaked lies of colonizers, because that's our struggle too, y'all. Follow Luke Mon Nation on patreon.com/LukeMonNation for lots of great content.